My wife is having an affair and wants me to raise another man's child. I refused but forgave her for the affair, only to have her cheat on me again with the same man. It was the day my wife was supposed to end her affair with the baby, and we were both sitting in the car outside the hospital, her sobbing and imploring me to raise the child. My reply to her was, do anything you want. It's your body and your life, but I won't parent another man's kid. That child will be a living symbol of your betrayal and a constant reminder of what you did. I will not submit myself to that. Termination or divorce. She paused for a moment before asking if I would give her another chance if she ended the conversation. I answered yes, and she completed the procedure. There were problems, and she had to spend a month on bed rest. She was short with me, uninterested, and chilly for a while afterward. We've lost the spark. I tried, but she didn't. One night, after a few drinks, she told me she was angry at me for forcing her to pick between me and the baby. I told her I was delighted she got fired. She deserved to suffer for what she did. I immediately regretted speaking this out loud, despite the fact that it is exactly how I felt and continue to feel. One day, I arrived home early from work to find her crying on the couch, with a man holding her. I'd met this man before, and she worked with him. The expressions on their faces revealed everything I needed to know. He was the father. It was not a one-night stand as she had stated. After I dragged him out of the house, she admitted to having a 3-month affair. I started divorce proceedings and quickly kicked her out of the house. She begged, wept, and pleaded for months before I finally broke down and brought her back. I told her she had to quit her job and stop communicating. She agreed and made the call right then. We relocated from her city and purchased a home on the opposite end of the country. We attended marriage counseling and got better. We gradually built up our strength. We now had complete transparency on all accounts and accepted that this was the way things were. As time passed, I stopped looking at her phone. Things were going fantastic between us. Our private life was wonderful. We went on several trips and began talking about having children. We tried for 2 years to conceive a kid, but were unsuccessful. When the most recent episode occurred, I was content, utterly exposed and with my defenses down. She had grown distant over the past few months, but not to the point where I was concerned. I asked her about it and she was always loving and assured me that everything was fine. However, when not prompted, her default was to be silent and seek her own place. She went out drinking with her pals one night while I stayed home. I awoke at 4 a.m. to hear her voice downstairs. I stepped outside and inquired if it was her. No response. She did not hear me. I realized she was on the phone relatively fast, and given the hour, her recent seclusion, and her problematic connection with loyalty, I decided to listen in. She was laughing and flirting, saying, I miss you too, and I love you too. I was very confident it was him. Then she began talking about how amazing the room service at their hotel was and when she would see him again. I had had enough and charged down the stairs like a bull, and she knew she was caught. She began crying, screaming, and cursing at me, claiming she had gone to the doctor and been told there was an issue during the termination process. She was intoxicated, slurring her words, and crying, but somewhere in the minutiae of terms like tear, scar tissue and permanent, I pulled it out of her that her womanhood had been harmed, and she would never be able to carry a child to term. I yelled back that I was delighted she received the termination, and if I could end him and take it away from her as well, I would. She then lay hands on me, and I pushed her away and went up to my room. I paced back and forth as she sat downstairs crying. That's where we stayed until the morning. When I got downstairs, she was sleeping. I woke her up and told her to take a shower and leave because I had already scheduled an appointment with my lawyer to file for divorce and she would not be staying at the house while I was gone. She sobbed and begged me not to go ahead with it. She claimed she was inebriated and didn't intend it, that she made up the lie about meeting him to harm me and that I was her one and only. She stated she was sorry for slapping me. It was last week. This week, she moved back in with her parents. She calls me 15 times per day. She sends long weepy text messages that I don't read or respond to since my lawyer advises I shouldn't contact her unless through him. I'm moving forward with the divorce. I was 20 when I met my husband. We met while traveling around Europe. I had just finished my vacation, and he was just getting started. We met and slept together on the same day and we spent the last few days together. We reconnected after he left for home and began a year-long long-distance relationship. During this period, we discussed past relationships and why they failed. I told him that my ex dumped me because I kissed another girl, which I didn't think was a big issue at the time, but I'd since realized that cheating is cheating, and I was wrong to do it. He came to me since his profession is freelance and he can do it from anywhere. I'd spent the last year settling into a career I genuinely enjoyed. That was his recommendation. He makes more money than I do and wanted to buy a home straight soon. I told him I'd prefer wait until we were married so we could purchase one together, but he said he didn't want to waste money on rent, and after we were married and I signed a prenup, he'd put my name on the mortgage. The proposal of a prenuptial agreement was irritating because he knew my family was wealthy and I'd never been concerned about money, but I accepted. I also wanted to preserve my own last name if we were married, but he refused to marry me unless I took his last name. I also agreed to that. He argued that fair is fair, and that if I wanted to live and raise children near my family rather than his, and that I would be the one to remain at home while he worked when we had children, I would have to make adjustments as well. I did not believe they were fair compromises, but I agreed. He bought the house against my preferences, and then we married. To his credit, he put my name on the mortgage the next week. This all left a bad taste in my mouth. Overall, things went well. I had a fulfilling social life and was extrovert. He preferred to spend his time at home. I had a large social circle, whereas he was preoccupied with work. We were different, yet we managed to make it work. Even though I was married, one of the the men I worked with indicated an interest, and I refused to say no. This was a mistake on my side, which I concede. When things were going well in my marriage, they were lovely, but I was also resentful of the termination I was forced to make and felt less like an equal partner in the marriage every day. He bought a puppy without telling me, which greatly irritated me. Unfortunately, I've never been good at talking and prefer to be alone when things become tough. So instead of addressing these concerns, I let them fester and spent more time with my pals, including the guy from work. My spouse was overprotective and requested me not to go out at night, even when I was staying with a female friend. What my spouse never understood was that I am not the apron-wearing, dishwashing sort of lady. I've always respected my freedom. These discussions created a schism between us, and I made a poor decision. I got intoxicated and slept with the man from the office. I came home, slept on the couch, and grieved all night. My spouse arrived the next morning and chastised me for not returning home at a respectable time. Greg, the other man, has never said anything like this to me. He enjoyed socializing, dancing, and other activities that my spouse did not. I was young and stupid, so I chose to continue seeing him. He was polite and decent, and the more time I spent with him, the more I wished I had met him sooner. I discovered I was pregnant. I had no idea who the infant was, and I was overcome with remorse. I informed Greg the day I found out, and he advised me to have a termination because he didn't want to be caught in the middle of parenting a child with a married woman. This marked the end of the affair. I informed my husband a week later. He did not have to force me to tell the truth, as he said a few months before. He noticed me upset, and I informed him. He flew home without informing me and ignored my calls. I realized then that I had made a terrible mistake and resolved to recommit to my marriage. I informed him that if the child was not his, I would seek an abortion. He told me to go **** myself and hung up. He eventually arrived home, and we discovered that the baby was not his. So, as we had agreed, I scheduled the termination. When we took the paternity test, the doctor asked if I wanted to know the gender. My husband responded for me, saying it didn't matter, and we left. I returned without him and discovered it wasn't a it, but a she, my kid. Throughout the week, I had thoughts of being a mother. I had always wanted to have children, and during this week, I didn't imagine the other man as my husband's baby. I pictured the three of us as a family. It wasn't ideal, but I couldn't think of a single reason why we couldn't make the best of a poor situation. I intended to tell him who the father truly was, and then I would resign my job. It wasn't ideal, but if he loved me, we could make it work. Life throws tests at us, and when I took my marriage vows, I realized this and hoped he did as well. The day of the appointment, I begged him not to force me to make a decision. I urged him to do one thing for me. Not to commit for the rest of his life, not even to love the baby, but to do one thing for me. I asked him to try. I asked him to give it a try. He informed me that he was filing for divorce. I need to state something clearly. Yes, I made mistakes, but I still love my husband. He was and still is the greatest love of my life. He told me he wouldn't even try to make it work, and that if I didn't undergo the surgery, he would leave and file for divorce. That day, I begged him to give me some time to think about it, and he also declined. I was torn between two terrible options, so I chose one. I underwent the operation. I was never going to raise a baby on my own. If he wasn't on board with this, I wasn't going to do it, and he made it obvious he wasn't. I was in more pain in the weeks following the operation than I had ever been in my life. During this time, I stayed with my parents because we couldn't be together. I blamed him for forcing me to choose. He still hated me for straying, and he told me that he hated me for wanting to keep the baby and asking him to be there for us. I didn't want it to be in vain, so I returned home and attempted to make it work. I kept my emotions bottled up because I didn't want to remind him of what I had done. I was on medical leave for 3 months, but none of my pals knew. As far as they knew, both my husband and I had miscarried, as had my parents. I had nobody to talk to. I invited Greg to come over, and we talked. I cried, and he cried beside me. It was amazing to be heard without having to wear a mask. These visits occurred another half-dozen times, and it is crucial to note that nothing intimate occurred. The romance was finished, and I was leaning on a friend, the only one who understood what I was going through. You know the rest. He returned home, discovered Greg was the father, discovered the affair, demanded a divorce, but forgave me. After he forgave me, I loved him with all of my heart for several years. I never forgot what happened, but we discussed having our own children. I was happy, and I could thank him for it. When I found out I couldn't have children anymore, I attempted to tell him, but I remembered the way he stared at me and the names he called me years before. I remembered how much he loved me, and I didn't want to ruin it by telling him I couldn't have children because of my betrayal. I reached out to Greg. I discovered out he had also moved away from our hometown and was only a few hours away. He's now married, but I wasn't wanting to restart anything. I just wanted to communicate. He told me to inform my spouse, but I couldn't. We agreed to meet, so I took the day off work. We met midway and slept together. We agreed it was a one-time occurrence and returned to our respective partners. I got drunk and told my husband everything after he discovered me on the phone with Greg. I was hurt and rude to him, and I told him I didn't regret meeting Greg. He called me names and said he was pleased I had given up the baby. I smacked him, which I regret, but I can't forgive him when he told me he was delighted that the decision he forced me to make denied me the opportunity to be a mother. I'll never forgive myself for the termination, nor will I ever forgive him. The difference is that he gets to move on and start a family, but I never will. I'm back home with my folks, and I've also met with divorce lawyers. They believe a prenuptial agreement is meaningless anymore, but I'm not taking anything away from him. I simply want everything to be over so that we can both find peace. I'll never forgive myself for the termination, nor will I ever never forgive him. The difference is that he gets to move on and start a family, but I never will. I'm back home with my folks, and I've also met with divorce lawyers. They believe a prenuptial agreement is meaningless anymore, but I'm not taking anything away from him. I simply want everything to be over so that we can both find peace. Wife's update. I just underwent extensive therapy and came to the realization that my husband had done nothing wrong. I'd like to say I forgive him for the termination, but there is nothing to forgive. That was the most significant realization I've had. I put him in a terrible situation and asked him to do something that would most likely have led to his suicide. He said it himself. I elected to have the termination, which caused irreversible damage to my own body. I was the only one who selected that. I selfishly damaged my marriage twice by cheating because it was simpler to sleep with someone else than to be an adult and stand by the man I promised to love. I deceived him in ways I will never comprehend, and I must live with the consequences, as well as my injured body, for the rest of my life. And I should keep that as a reminder forever.